Does it matter who gives an argument or why they give it? Should you consider the source or just the logic? Let's consider. Hello, philosophers. I'm Chico. Welcome to the Philosopher Show, where we consider the greatest questions of human history. In this video, I'll talk about what an ad hominem fallacy is, how to respond to it, and how to avoid making it yourself. Actually, this whole video came about because there's this interesting thing going on in California, and I thought it would be a good excuse to learn about a specific kind of reasoning fallacy. Starting just yesterday, our Governor Newsom, decided to shut down all of the beaches in Orange County, basically because last weekend, Huntington Beach and Newport beaches, the two bigger cities in Orange County, had a huge influx of people, and there were some people that weren't adhering to safety standards, for the coronavirus. And because of that, he decided we're going to shut everybody down. Right now, it's like a huge deal between state and local governments, and it's all over social media. Now in San Clemente, we kept the beach open recently just for exercise, so jogging, swimming, surfing. Now that actually ended up working out pretty well. It seemed like we didn't have any kind of breaches into the safety radius. Now some people who are surfers started to argue on social media that the governor should have kept the beaches open for those reasons and just worried about people who were, being negligent at the beach. Because for the most part right now, since all the parking lots are closed out, we don't get a bunch of people that are all clogged together. The surfers and the swimmers, they all seem to be spaced out pretty evenly. But that argument rubbed many people the wrong way, and a lot of them were responding with, of course you would say that, you're a surfer. So what's the problem here? Well, in one sense, it seems like you shouldn't trust this argument that a surfer is giving because he has a vested interest, or she has a vested interest, in convincing you that you should keep the beaches open just for surfing. But then again, what are they supposed to do? If surfers are right about this, should they just sit back silently because they might get something out of speaking up? In other words, the big question here is when somebody presents an argument for a position, should we consider the circumstances of that person? And it seems like the response might be a little bit of a yes and a no. First, on the yes side, it seems like we have this psychological tendency to believe in arguments that are very poor arguments so long as they prove the things that we want to believe. And maybe not unknowingly, right? Oftentimes this is something that just we subconsciously tend to accept these arguments. So for example, the big reason why Governor Newsom shut down all the beaches in Orange County was because last week when we had that huge influx, this Orange County Register article was published with a photograph that made it look like it was super crowded, and that got, that sort of blew up. But a lot of photographers pointed out that, hey, the lens that was used here takes away the depth so that you can see. So like it makes it look like just miles and miles of beach are just scrunched together. So it looks like all these people are all close together when maybe they aren't. And in fact, the sheriff's department said that they weren't. And as I'm reading some of these arguments that these photographers are given, I see one guy just start attacking people on the comment section, which is, you should avoid reading these things, man. They get disgusting. But he's basically making terrible arguments, saying that this photographer was a liar because he's saying that the numbers that the sheriffs were reporting were not correct numbers or something like that. And the photographer kept saying, no, that's not what I said. I'm saying that this is a deceptive photo because of the lens that they used. And yet, so this guy's constantly putting out these straw man arguments, poor arguments. You could see that in this guy's head, he thought he was making a great case, but since it proved what he wanted it to prove, even though this guy seemed like a decently intelligent guy, he was just sort of overlooking the fact that these are bad arguments. Another point on the yes side here is that not only do we tend to accept poor arguments, but we also tend to accept poor facts, or I should say, facts that aren't really facts, and present them as true when we don't really have good reason for doing so when they support our position. So here's on the other side, I saw a lot of people that were claiming that this OC Register photograph had been doctored. Now, those people were saying stuff like, or they were saying like, I bet you this happened like months ago and this wasn't really during the coronavirus pandemic. And the editor-in-chief ran an article saying, hey, look, you can see in the picture people are wearing masks. Obviously, this happened during the coronavirus. And those people refused to accept that fact, right? I mean, they refused to look at that, and they kept presenting the facts like this is probably an old photograph or something like that. Well, of course, like they have this tendency because it proves or it helps to support the position that they want because they want to go to the beach. So on the one hand, it seems like it's important, where a person is coming from to look at their argument, to look at the facts that they're using. But on the other hand, it seems like undue attention to those things is fallacious. And here's what I mean. Go back to the original arguments we were talking about, where the surfers were saying we should keep the beaches open just for surfing and for exercising and stuff like that. Now, it's possible for people who are not surfers, who don't even live by the beach, who aren't exercising there, to give the same arguments and have no vested interest in those arguments being accepted. So it seems pretty arbitrary to deny an argument just because one person is giving it and they happen to benefit from that argument, whereas anybody could give that argument and not benefit from it. In other words, the argument itself is neutral, even if the people giving the argument might not be. And the second point is that the people arguing against the surfers were just as susceptible to this same problem. So, of course, these people who are giving it are not surfers. And although this might not be true, they believe that they would benefit from surfers staying at home. So, of course, they have a vested interest in surfers not going out surfing. Is that a reason to reject what they have to say? No. They might have good arguments here, but just because they benefit from these surfers not going out doesn't mean that we should just deny their arguments. But in any case, the point here is that we all have this susceptibility. And it seems like we always go around evaluating other people's arguments without looking at our own selves and our own prejudices and saying hey, I'm not quite as objective. I'm not 100% objective, right? I have my subjectivity. These people have their subjectivity. Let's try to be as objective as possible amongst ourselves, but let me not just shut them down because they have a position or because they have a perspective. So what's the result here? Well, I think the fact that someone's circumstances might tempt them to lie, or might tempt them to deceive themselves, or might tempt them to believe in fallacious reasoning would give us reason to evaluate the arguments that they present. But notice, really, that's what we should be doing in the first place anyway, right? Everybody's susceptible to mistakes in reasoning, even when they don't have any benefit coming from the reasoning. So really, we should be evaluating everybody's arguments for anything. Now, of course, it's also the case that we have very limited time and very limited brain cells. We can't go around evaluating everybody's arguments for everything. So the fact that someone's circumstances might give them some kind of temptation to poor reasoning or even to lying or something like that will be one factor in us deciding what we're going to spend our time evaluating. It becomes a logical fallacy, however, when we let that circumstance dictate a negative prejudice or just throwing out the argument in general without even considering it. In those cases, we are looking at the person giving it and not the argument itself, when the argument could stand on its own. So this is a logical fallacy called an ad hominem. Ad hominem, by the way, is Latin for to the man, right? In other words, to the person. You're attacking the person and not the argument itself. And there are three kinds of ad hominem fallacies. The one that we're talking about specifically is called the circumstantial ad hominem. And that's when you're attacking the person's circumstances versus, we'll look at the other kinds of things that we could be attacking. And circumstances including things like whether that person benefits from this argument or not. So sure, it might be the case that a surfer benefits from you believing that she should go out and surf. However, that doesn't make their argument wrong, right? It doesn't mean that we should reject that argument without consideration just because she would benefit from that argument. And by the way, the same thing goes in the reverse. So for example, some arguments, I've seen surfers argue that we have this phrase, blank don't surf, right? If we don't like somebody and we just want to dismiss that person, we put their name and then don't surf. And I'm studiously trying to avoid a person's name here that I've seen recently, a politician will say. But yeah, it's like when I see that, I'm always like, they don't surf, huh? Okay, what does that have to do with anything this person has to say? In any case, let me give you a few more examples. You know what? All right, it's time to get real, okay? I have to be honest. When I look at different philosophers, sometimes I'll go past a section called feminist philosophy, okay? I apologize ahead of time for what you're about to hear. Okay, I'm trying to be real. And when I see that section, every time something in my mind just clicks right off, I know what that's about. I'm a misogynist, right? Like this is all that you guys are going to talk about. Yeah, just trying to be honest. Like this is what I see in my own mind. I think a woman is writing this feminist philosophy, and because she's a woman, she's going to have this negative view of men, and I'm going to be cutting me down. And I have no idea what goes on in feminist philosophy. Not because I don't, by the way, not because I think it's not worth pursuing, but because I just don't have the time to read every single philosophy subject. There's so many. That's not a cop-out. I'm willing to give it a shot. Yeah, but the point is, like, me assuming that because a person is a woman, they are going to argue this way. Well, that's not quite the ad hominem, but me assuming that because a woman is writing this argument, then her biases are going to make her arguments poor or invalid or something like that. That would be an ad hominem. But let me give you a different one. Something that I've heard also sort of on the reverse here. I'm trying to balance this all out. Whenever I hear patriarchy arguments, whenever I hear people dismissed because they're white old men. I mean, I'm not a white person. I'm getting old, right? But I am a man. And I remember hearing Tori Amos once was interviewed about her Cornflake Girl song. And she told the interviewer that he was a man so that he was the enemy. And I'm like, what? Okay, whatever. Maybe men don't understand you. Maybe white people don't understand Latinos. And maybe they're completely wrong about what they have to say. But that doesn't mean that because they're white, they're wrong. Or because they don't understand what it's like that their arguments are necessarily wrong. What we have to do instead is to look at their arguments and say, okay, got what you're saying here. Here's why I disagree. And by the way, I have firsthand experience, and this is why I think that you're not placing enough importance here or there. Also, the okay boomer argument. I mean, I'm Generation X, okay? So I am not a boomer, but that's just stupid. I mean, okay, but because you're from the boomer generation, you're automatically wrong. It's just dumb. So circumstantial is one kind of ad hominem argument. A second kind is abusive ad hominem. And that would be not attacking the person because of their circumstances, but just attacking the person directly. This would be more like name calling. Here are a few examples of the ad hominem arguments that I got from the comment section in these articles about the Newsom order. And yeah, the comment section in political articles is just like a fecund field of logical fallacy. Not the YouTube philosophy comment section. To be honest, I found some really awesome comments. I'm serious. Like, I've found some interesting people having interesting points. I've learned a lot from my comment section. So please, like, comment away. That sounds very sycophantic. I apologize, but yeah, I really appreciate all the comments I've been getting. In any case, so here are a few. People who side with the governor are rolling over. They are pathetic. They are weak. One of them spelled W-E-E-K, by the way, which I'm not the kind of guy that goes and corrects your grammar. That's star weak. I don't do that, but it gave me a chuckle. Friends of drug addicts. So if you were going to argue this way, right? If you were going to say that you should not side with the governor, then sure, you can give philosophical arguments. You can give legitimate arguments without name calling. You could say that these people are overly cautious. You could say they're unnecessarily protective. And this isn't just like putting it nicely, right? That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the name calling, which is just attacking a person rather than attacking their position and saying this position is overly cautious. This position is unnecessarily protective. Now, people who rejected the governor's position were arrogant, clowns, ignorant. I mean, things that had nothing to do with their position. Again, if you want to argue that you should comply with the governor, then there are plenty of reasons you can give. That position is unsafe, or that position is selfish, or that we should never break the law. I don't know. Whatever it is, you can give legitimate arguments against a position without attacking the person themselves. Now, one interesting dilemma here is, what about when you're attacking a person's character? Sometimes it seems like that's relevant. So, for example, if we're considering somebody that we're going to put in a leadership position, let's say, a politician, let's say the head of a church or something like that, we might be looking at their character to see whether they would be trustworthy stewards of our state or our church. And we might attack their character because we think, well, look at their character. they should not be put in positions of authority. What we're looking at is their trustworthiness of the person themselves. Can we trust this person with the power we're about to bestow on them? So that's not an ad hominem because we're not evaluating an argument. Another example is when we are evaluating character for testimony. So legally, especially, we will evaluate a person who claims to be an eyewitness for their character because it might be the case that they've shown themselves to be unreliable because morally or something like that, So, for example, if you are part of a murderous drug cartel and all the evidence points to your buddy that did something awful, and you come and say, I'm eyewitness. I saw that he wasn't there that day. It was this guy of my rival gang. He was the one doing it. Well, I don't know. I mean, if you killed a whole bunch of people, I don't know that we can really trust your eyewitness testimony here. But again, we're not evaluating a position here. We're evaluating the trustworthiness of your report. But if somebody is presenting an argument that is valid using reliable facts, and we reject that because we're name calling, it doesn't really matter, if that person is an idiot or not. If we're interested in the truth of the matter, then we'll evaluate the argument given and not the person giving it. A final type of ad hominem, and sometimes I've actually been taught this one apart from the ad hominem, but when I saw it listed under the ad hominems, I thought, yeah, that kind of makes sense, which is called a tu quoque in the Latin, meaning like same to you, basically. I would call this the hypocrisy objection. When I first read Paul Johnson's book, Intellectuals, it was an interesting book to me because I wasn't sure what to make of it. It goes through the lives of a number of leading intellectuals, some philosophers like Marx and Sartre and Bertrand Russell, and then some other authors like Hemingway and Ibsen. And I remember he looks at their lives, and these are people that a lot of people look to, are convinced by that they have the right way to live life, right? They know the ways that we should live life. They know the way that would lead to us acting ethically and the way that would lead to us being happy. And yet, in this book, Johnson shows that these people were very unethical in many different ways, and a lot of them were very miserable. Now, personally, to be totally honest, I disagree wholeheartedly with a lot of these guys. So for me, it's very easy for me to point to this book and say, aha, see, like their philosophies are a joke. Look at the way that they live. So it brings up the question, did the way that the philosopher live impugn their philosophy of life? So, for example, I had a doctor that was overweight and was very it had a lot to say about eating healthy. And he told me all about eating sodium the right way and all these kinds of things. But he was, of a weight lover. And I remember thinking dude, why should I mean, this is like a first reaction, right? First reaction was, why should I listen to you? I'm in way better shape than you are. And then that's just sort of the way the mind goes, But a well-trained logician, right? I start to think wait a second, that is a logical fallacy, right? It doesn't matter whether this guy is healthy or not. He's a doctor. He studied this stuff, so he knows what does lead to health. And in the same way, ultimately, I had to concede that the lives of these different philosophers wasn't a reason for me necessarily to reject their philosophies straight out. So that would be a tu quoque. If I'm looking at somebody who's espousing something and I'm saying, look, you are not healthy in this way that you're claiming that we should be healthy, or I'm saying, you are not living ethically, even though you say that we should live ethical, the person might be right, just a poor example of that person. I think one thing that Paul Johnson's book does is to show that these guys shouldn't necessarily be heroes, we shouldn't necessarily be looking up to them, even if they are right. And that's kind of a bummer that, your heroes turn out to be not so great. But it doesn't just straight off the bat necessarily prove them wrong. I'll talk about that necessarily in just a second here. A couple more examples of a tu quoque. Religious hypocrites are almost, a lot of people will just not listen at all to what a religion has to say, because they'll say, well, look, these people who are of this religion are total hypocrites, so this can't be right. Well, it doesn't matter if they are hypocrites, right? The religion might be right in itself and have, I'd say any philosophy has people that don't practice it the right way. So these people might be practicing it the wrong way and yet be right about the religion. Or ethicists get busted routinely on doing bad things, cheating on spouses and I don't know, all kinds of stuff. So that doesn't mean that they're wrong about their ethics. It just means that, I don't know, they're not very ethical. Or politicians might argue that we should pay taxes, and yet they get busted for tax evasion. You can think of all kinds of different ways that this could be applied. Now, I said not necessarily. Let's come back to that. So it could be the case, and I think it is the case for a lot of these philosophers in the book Intellectuals, that a philosopher argues that a specific way of living is going to lead to a specific thing. So these guys, a lot of them argue, here's a good example, a so-so example. Socrates believed that to know the good is to do the good. If you knew what was good, you would do it every single time because you know that was desirable, and so you do what's desirable. Now, if Socrates, this is why it's not a great example, if Socrates were a bad guy, he would be a counterexample to his philosophy. It would be the case that his life proves that even if you know the good, that doesn't mean that you necessarily do the good. That makes him a counterexample. And the same thing with these other guys. If they're arguing that to live this particular way causes you to be ethical and causes you to be happy, and they're living that way and they're not ethical or they're not happy, that is a counterexample to their philosophy. However, the same thing would go for any of their followers, right? If anybody that they told, hey, live this way and you'll be ethical and happy, and that person lives that way and they're not ethical and happy, then they would be a counterexample to that philosophy. The only difference between the philosopher being the counterexample and one of their adherents being the counterexample is the philosopher being the counterexample comes with a little bit of irony, but that doesn't add anything to the counterexample itself. So I say that not necessarily the case that the tu quoque is a fallacy. Yes and no. Like if you're attacking this position purely because this person is a poor example of the position they're espousing, then no, that's tu quoque, that's a logical fallacy. But if they are acting as their own counterexample, then that's not a tu quoque, that is just, you just wrong. So those are the three kinds of ad hominems. Now let me give you a few tips on how to identify it, how to respond to it, and how to avoid it. First, how to identify it. I think, here's what I suggest to my students. I tell them, like, any argument you get, pretend it was written down on a piece of paper and the piece of paper came blowing across your path. You pick it up and you read it. You have no idea where this argument came from. You just have to look at it and consider it. If the reasons you were about to reject this argument now all of a sudden go away, if you can't hold to those same reasons, you were probably about to commit the ad hominem fallacy. You were probably considering the person giving it and not the argument itself. So that, I would say, is how to identify it. However, I do want to pose one big exception. No argument really is given in a vacuum like the thought experiment I just gave you. So a lot of times people will give arguments that will be contrary to other beliefs that they have. So an exception, I would say, to this idea is that when you're considering what a person has to say overall, you might say, well, look, this argument you're giving is contrary to this other argument you gave in this other area. So, what's up? How do you avoid making this fallacy yourself? I think you have to be arguing not to win, but to understand. If you're trying to beat somebody, you are going to be tempted to attack that person and not the position that they hold. Whereas if you're trying to understand somebody and why they would say something, then you're going to give that person the benefit of the doubt in the places where they should have the benefit of the doubt. In fact, a lot of times, at least in my own mind, if not verbally, what I like to do is try to help that person's position or offer different possible ways they could amend their position or something like that, just because I want this to be a collaborative effort here, right? I don't really care about me winning it or me getting the position that I want. What I care about is, let's seek truth together and do our best. And if I don't get the position I wanted, oh well, but at least that we're going towards something that's true. And I say that, and I might be like one of those intellectuals, right? Because I don't always do that. That's my goal, right? I'm not saying that I do that every single time, because I'm just as petty as everybody else, right? I want to surf really badly, and I really want people to buy this argument that we should all surf. I think we should. If you want to check out, I have a video on COVID-19 and surfing, and I think that there are some solutions for us to be able to surf that makes sense. I absolutely could be arguing very poorly and I just really want to go surf. So yeah, don't hold me to that. But anyway, that's the way you avoid making this fallacy. How do you respond when somebody else makes this fallacy? Now, this is a lot tougher because when somebody comes out flinging names at you, man, that is just rises the tempers and you want to go back with those names too. So I think the first step is patience, is to listen first and let that person get everything out that they want to get out and just do your best to let those names just bounce off. And I found a lot of times, but not always, if you're very patient with a person and if you're trying to understand what they have to say, a lot of times they will want to know what you have to say. You'll earn the right to be heard. I've heard that. I didn't come up with that, by the way, but I love that. And I use that a lot. You earn the right to be heard, and then the ad hominems, oh well. So patience, number one. Number two, it's always an effective option to point it out, right? And when I say point it out, don't tell somebody you just made an ad hominem attack. That is, either they're not going to know what you're talking about and you're going to sound very pompous because you're using this crazy Latin word, or they're going to know what you're talking about and it's just going to get into like a scrutinizing, like, well, this is your logic, this is mine, and it's just going to be, and you're not going to get anywhere. Instead, I think what I would do is to acknowledge the negative thing. I mean, if they're calling you names like idiot, then don't say, yeah, you're right, I'm an idiot. But, well, for example, in our surfer example, I think acknowledge, yeah, you're right, I would get something out of this surfing, right? That there is a benefit here for me, and that gives me that temptation to want to believe this. And then say, but let's pretend that I weren't a surfer. What do you think about this argument? You know, what do you think about these reasons? And see if that works. I think presenting it like that, rather than, you know, just calling somebody out for a logical fallacy, a lot of times is helpful, but that's not always going to be the case. And if it's not helpful, I to be honest, like if somebody just flinging names at you and there's just no like reasoning with the person, then I just get out of that argument, because there's nothing you're going to be able to say to that person that is unreasonable like that is going to convince them otherwise. So there's no point in talking to them. In any case, that's all the important stuff to say about the ad hominem fallacy. If you have any questions, please hit me up in the comments. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Adios.